Welcome back to Deep Dive Daily. It is great to have you with us.
Great to be here.
Today, we're doing something I really love. We're taking this stack of documents. They look pretty intimidating on the surface.
Oh, yeah. Dense legal texts, constitutional articles.
Exactly. We're looking at Indian polity specifically, and our job, as always, is to dig through all that, that density and find those aha moments.
Find the story inside the law.
That's it. And honestly, if there's one part of the Indian Constitution that reads less like a legal manual and more like a political thriller, it's what we're covering today.
The emergency provisions, for sure.
Absolutely. This isn't just about administrative rules. As I was going through the source material, we're talking Part 18 of the Constitution, Article 352 to 360, it just struck me that what we're really looking at is the instruction manual for a complete legal transformation of the state.
It's the break glass in case emergency box.
Yes. But the tools inside they're incredibly powerful.
They are. And to really get why this section even exists, you have to start with a concept that makes the Indian Constitution, well, it makes it almost unique in the world of federal democracies.
The source material calls it the shape-shifting nature of the Constitution. I love that image.
It's the perfect term for it.
It sounds like science fiction, but it's political science.
It really is. I mean, think about a standard federal system like the United States.
Okay.
In the U.S., the structure is rigid. It's set in what Dr. B.R. Ambedkar called a tight mold of federalism.
Tight mold?
Exactly. You have the federal government in Washington, you have the states. They have their separate powers, their jurisdictions, and that division is, legally sacred.
It doesn't change.
It doesn't matter if there's a war, an economic crash, a huge crisis. That legal relationship between the state and the federal government stays exactly the same.
Yeah.
You can't change it without a formal, very difficult constitutional amendment.
Right. The building is built, the walls are load-bearing, and they just don't move.
Precisely. But the Indian founding fathers, they were looking at the, frankly, chaotic history of the subcontinent, and they realized that a rigid mold like that might just break under pressure.
They needed something more flexible.
Something that could bend without breaking. So they designed a system that is federal in normal times. Power is shared between the center and the states. But it can convert into a unitary system during an emergency.
And that conversion happens without a single formal amendment to the text. It's baked right in.
That is the shape-shifting quality.
Yeah.
When an emergency is declared, it's like a switch flips.
Okay.
The states, which are normally these autonomous partners, they suddenly become subordinates. The center becomes all-powerful. It effectively transforms the political system to meet the requirements of time and circumstances, as Ambedkar put it.
It's fascinating because it's like an acknowledgement that in times of extreme crisis, the luxury of federal debate might need to be paused for the sake of national survival.
But, and this is the key thing we're going to see, that power to pause federalism is a double-edged sword.
A deadly weapon, as it was later described.
Exactly.
So, okay, we have a clear mission for this deep dive. We're going to explore the 3 specific types of emergencies the Constitution allows for. We'll start with the national emergency under Article 352. Then we'll get into the really controversial Article 356. It is known as President's Rule.
And then the third one, the financial emergency under Article 360.
Right. And we're not just going to list the rules. We need to really understand the legal framework, the specific acts that change them, especially the 44th Amendment.
And the historical cases, where these powers were used and, sometimes seriously misused.
Let's jump right into the big one then. Article 352, the national emergency. This is the one that deals with the security of India itself.
This is the nuclear option of the Constitution.
Yeah.
Under Article 352, the president can declare a national emergency. But he can't just do it because he feels like it. The grounds are very, very specific.
The text lists 3 grounds, right? It's war, external aggression, and armed rebellion.
Right. And the first 2, war and external aggression.
Yeah.
That's what we'd classify as an external emergency.
That seems pretty straightforward.
It is. If a foreign country attacks India, or if India is formally at war, the center needs to take command. We saw this in 1962 during the conflict with China, in what was then NIFA.
Now Arunachal Pradesh.
Exactly. And again in 1971 during the war with Pakistan.
And in those cases, the nation rallies. The centralization of power makes sense. You need a unified military and diplomatic front.
Of course. But then we have that third category.
Armed rebellion.
In the current text, it says armed rebellion. But, and this is a massive but, if you were to go back and look at the original Constitution from 1950, That phrase just wasn't there.
Okay, this is where the detective work comes in. What did it say originally?
It used the phrase internal disturbance.
Internal disturbance. Huh, that
Quick
sounds
check.
incredibly vague.
It is.
I mean, a bad traffic jam is a disturbance. A strike is a disturbance.
That vagueness was the fatal flaw. Internal disturbance has no strict legal definition. It could mean a police mutiny, or it could mean a political protest that just gets a little too loud.
And that phrase became the loophole for, well, for the most controversial event in India's constitutional history.
The 1975 emergency.
This was the internal emergency declared by Indira Gandhi.
Yes. The government at the time, they didn't claim there was a war. They claimed that certain persons were inciting the police and armed forces against their duties.
So they took political unrest and protests.
And they categorized it as an internal disturbance.
So essentially, political opposition was reframed as a national security threat using that one vague phrase.
Precisely. And because the Constitution allowed it, the emergency was declared. Civil liberties were suspended, opposition leaders were arrested, the press was censored. It showed the country that the shapeshifter could turn into a monster if the safeguards weren't strong enough.
And that experience, I mean, the trauma of that 1975 to 77 period, that's why the text we're reading today is different.
It is.
We have to talk about the 44th Amendment Act of 1978.
The 44th Amendment is, for all intents and purposes, the hero of this story. When the Janata Party came to power after the emergency ended in 77, their primary legislative goal was to make sure that such a misuse of power could never, ever happen again.
They went through Article 352 with a fine-tooth comb.
They did. So they're the ones who deleted internal disturbance.
And they replaced it.
They substituted it with armed rebellion. This raised the bar significantly. You can't declare an emergency just because people are protesting in the streets. There has to be an active armed attempt to overthrow the state.
It narrows the scope. It prevents political misuse.
Exactly. But they didn't just stop at changing the definition. The source material highlights some fascinating procedural safeguards they added.
The one about the cabinet really stood out to me.
Oh, that is a crucial historical correction. In 1975, the decision to declare the emergency was largely taken by the Prime Minister, Indira Gandhi. She just advised the president to sign the proclamation.
And her own cabinet.
Her own Council of Ministers. They weren't even consulted beforehand. They were just informed after the deed was done.
It was a fait accompli.
A total fait accompli. So the 44th Amendment closed that loophole tight. It introduced a provision that the president can proclaim a national emergency only after receiving a written recommendation from the cabinet.
Written being the key word there.
The most important word. No verbal instructions, no, I thought she said so. It requires a formal written document from the entire Council of Ministers. That's the PM and the cabinet rank ministers.
It forces collective responsibility. The prime minister can't act alone.
That's a massive check on individual power.
Okay, so that's one check. Let's look at the other big one, the judiciary. During a crisis, you would hope the courts would step in if the government goes too far. But in the mid-70s, the courts were, they were effectively sidelined.
They were handcuffed. Yeah. In fact, during the emergency, the government passed the 38th Amendment Act of 1975.
And what did that do?
This amendment explicitly said that the president's satisfaction regarding the emergency was final and conclusive. It could not be challenged in any court on any ground.
That's basically saying the president is the law and you can't question him.
It was an immunity shield. But the 44th Amendment, it stripped that shield away. It just deleted that provision.
Okay.
And after that, the Supreme Court clarified its stance in the landmark Minerva Mills case of 1980.
This case is cited all over our sources.
All right.
What was the core ruling on emergencies?
The Supreme Court held that the proclamation of a national emergency is subject to judicial review.
So the courts can look at it?
Yes. The court said that, while they won't second-guess the political necessity, they can check if the decision is malified.
Malified, meaning in bad faith?
Yes. Or if it's based on wholly extraneous and irrelevant facts. Basically, a president can't just make things up. If the proclamation is absurd or perverse, the courts have the power to strike it down.
So the president is not a king. He's a constitutional functionary who is subject to the Constitution.
Precisely.
So we've got the cabinet check, and we've got the judicial check. There's one more layer of control. Parliament. The representatives of the people.
This is the democratic check. Originally, the government had 2 months to get the emergency approved by Parliament. The 44th Amendment said, that's too long.
They cut it down.
They reduced it to 1 month. If Parliament doesn't approve it within 30 days, The emergency just lapses. It dies.
And the voting threshold changed too, right? It wasn't a simple majority anymore.
Well, which is very dangerous. A simple majority is just more than 50% of the members present and voting. Any ruling government usually has that. It's way too easy to just rubber stamp a dictatorship with a simple majority.
So the 44th Amendment brought in the special majority.
This is a double hurdle. To approve an emergency now, you need two things. First, a majority of the total membership of the House.
Okay.
Second, and this is the hard part, a majority of not less than 2/3 of the members present and voting.
2/3. That's a high bar. That usually means you need to reach across the aisle.
You need a broad consensus that the nation is actually in danger. It prevents a purely partisan emergency.
And once it's approved, does it last forever?
No. It lasts for 6 months, and the government has to go back to Parliament every 6 months to get it renewed. This periodic parliamentary approval ensures that the executive is constantly accountable to the legislature.
What if the mood of the country changes? Say the emergency is declared, Parliament approves it, but then, the situation improves or the people turn against it. Can Parliament stop it?
Yes. The president can revoke at any time, of course. But the 44th Amendment gave the Lok Sabha a loaded gun.
How so?
If the Lok Sabha passes a resolution disapproving the continuation of the emergency, the president must revoke it.
He has no choice, no discretion.
None. And to make sure the government can't just, refuse to let the Lok Sabha meet, the law says that if 1/10 of the Lok Sabha members sign a written notice, a special sitting of the House must be held within 14 days to vote on that very resolution.
It's just incredible to see how the legal framework evolved. It went from a system based on trust like, the president knows best, to a system based on verification and checks.
It's a system that learned from its burns.
Okay, let's pivot now from the machinery of the state to the reality of the citizen. Because when the shapeshifter turns unitary, the biggest impact is felt by the common person. We have to talk about fundamental rights.
This is what the sources call the drastic and wide-ranging effect. And to understand this, we have to navigate a bit of a legal maze that confuses a lot of people. The difference between Article 358 and Article 359.
I'll admit, reading through them, they seem similar at first. They both restrict rights, but the mechanism is totally different.
Very different. Let's start with Article 358. Think of this one as the automatic sledgehammer.
Okay, the sledgehammer.
Article 358 deals specifically with Article 19 of the Constitution.
And Article 19 is the big one. Freedom of speech, assembly, association, movement, residence, and profession. The 6 freedoms.
The core civil liberties. Under Article 358, the moment a national emergency is proclaimed, Article 19 is automatically suspended. There's no separate order needed. It vanishes.
So the state can make any law it wants that ignores free speech.
Yes. The state is freed from the restrictions of Article 19. It can take executive actions or make laws that abridge those rights, and you cannot challenge them in court. However, and here comes the 44th Amendment again, there is a catch.
The distinction between external and internal emergencies.
Exactly. This automatic suspension only happens if the emergency is declared on the grounds of war or external aggression.
So if it's an armed rebellion, an internal emergency, Article 19 is safe.
Yes, and that is a massive protection. If there's an internal conflict, the government cannot automatically silence the press or stop people from assembling. They can't just use Article 358 to crush internal dissent.
So that's Article 358, the sledgehammer. That brings us to Article 359. If 358 is the sledgehammer, what's 359?
Article 359 is more like a padlock on the courtroom door.
A padlock, okay.
It doesn't suspend the rights themselves.
Oh.
So theoretically, the rights still exist. But what it does is it suspends the enforcement of those rights.
Explain that distinction. I mean, what good is a right if I can't enforce it?
In practice, very little. Under Article 359, the president issues a specific order saying the right to move any court for the enforcement of fundamental rights A, B, and C is hereby suspended.
So I might legally have the right to free speech, but if the police arrest me for speaking, I can't go to the Supreme Court and get a writ to release me.
Exactly. The remedy is suspended. And this applies to whatever rights the president lists in his order.
Now, this leads to the darkest chapter. During the 1975 emergency, the argument was made that all rights could be suspended, including the right to life.
Yes.
If the police detained you, or even killed you, the court said they couldn't interfere.
That was the infamous ADM Jabalpur judgment, often called the habeas corpus case. The Supreme Court, in a 4-1 majority, essentially said that during an emergency, the citizen has no locus standi to question the state, even regarding their life and liberty. It was a complete surrender of judicial duty.
And the 44th Amendment fixed this.
It did. It created what I like to call the Holy Grail of rights. The 44th Amendment stated unequivocally that the enforcement of Article 20 and Article 21 can never be suspended.
Let's remind everyone what those cover.
So Article 20 offers protection in respect of conviction for offenses. Things like no double jeopardy, you can't be tried twice for the same crime, and no ex post facto laws.
Right. You can't be punished for something that wasn't a crime when you did it.
Correct. And Article 21.
The right to life and personal liberty.
The cornerstone. The 44th Amendment ensures that no matter how bad the emergency gets, war, rebellion, alien invasion, whatever, the state cannot deprive you of your life or liberty without due process of law. And crucially, you always retain the right to go to court to challenge that deprivation. Habeas corpus cannot be suspended. Ever.
That is such a profound statement. It basically says that the physiological existence of the citizen is sacred, even when the existence of the state is threatened.
Correct. It places a floor below which the state cannot sink.
We've looked at the citizen. Now let's briefly look at the states themselves. When the system shifts to unitary, what happens to the state governments? Do they just dissolve?
In a national emergency, no, they don't dissolve. They stay in office. But they become puppets. The center acquires the power to give executive directions to a state on any matter.
And normally the center can only direct them on specific things, like maintaining national highways or something.
Exactly. But in an emergency, the center can tell the state how to run its police, its agriculture, its education, anything. And on top of that, Parliament can make laws on subjects that are normally on the state list.
So that whole division of power is just erased.
Temporarily suspended. And financially, the president can modify the distribution of revenues. He can reduce or even cancel the funds going from the center to the states.
There is one more structural impact that I found really interesting because it messes with the timeline of democracy itself. The life of the Lok Sabha.
Yes. Normally, the Lok Sabha has a 5-year term. But if a national emergency is in operation, Parliament can pass a law to extend its own life.
For how long?
For 1 year at a time. And they can do this, theoretically, for any length of time, as long as the emergency is running.
So if the emergency lasts for 10 years, the same Parliament could sit for 15 years without an election.
Theoretically, yes. In fact, during the 1975 emergency, the term of the 5th Lok Sabha was extended twice. It ended up lasting nearly 6 years. It essentially allows the ruling party to pause democracy and avoid facing the electorate.
It's a sobering thought. But let's move on to the second type of emergency, the one that actually gets used and abused far more often, Article 356.
The state emergency or constitutional emergency. But we all know it as President's rule.
The source material calls this a deadly weapon, which is, it's ironic because didn't Dr. Ambedkar, the architect of the Constitution, say he hoped it would be a dead letter?
He did. In the Constituent Assembly debates, Ambedkar was very, very hesitant about Article 356. He hoped it would remain a dead letter, meaning it would exist on paper but almost never be used, only as an absolute last resort when a state government had completely collapsed.
And how did that hope pan out?
Terribly. Since 1950, President's rule has been imposed more than 125 times.
Wow. That is not a last resort, that's a habit.
Exactly. As H.V. Kamath, another member of the Constituent Assembly, later quipped, Dr. Ambedkar is dead, and the articles are very much alive.
So what triggers this deadly weapon? How does the center justify taking over a state?
Article 356 empowers the president to issue a proclamation, if he is satisfied, that a situation has arisen in which the government of the state cannot be carried on in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution.
The failure of constitutional machinery.
Right. And usually, the president acts on a report from the governor of the state. But, and this is a huge loophole, the article says the president can act on the report or otherwise.
Or otherwise. That's another one of those delightfully vague legal terms, isn't it?
It means the president, which really means the central government, can decide to take over a state even without the governor's report.
And there's another article, 365.
Yes, Article 365. This says that if a state fails to comply with any valid direction from the center, the president can assume that the constitutional machinery has broken down.
So if New Delhi says implement this policy and the state says no, New Delhi can legally say, right, you're failing the Constitution, we're taking over.
That is the implication, yes.
And unlike the national emergency where the state government becomes a puppet, in President's rule, the state government is actually fired.
Yes.
Yeah.
The chief minister is the head of government. When Article 356 is invoked, the president dismisses the Council of Ministers. The government falls.
And the state assembly, the elected MLAs.
They are either suspended, so put in a sort of limbo, or dissolved entirely, which means fresh elections have to be held.
And who runs the state in the meantime?
The governor. He stops being a ceremonial figurehead and becomes the actual administrator running the state on behalf of the president. That's why we call it president's rule. And the parliament in Delhi takes over the legislative powers, passing the state budget, making state laws, everything.
You mentioned 125 times. That implies a massive amount of misuse over the years.
Oh, it was rampant. For decades, Article 356 was used as a political tool. If the party in power at the center didn't like the party in power in a state, they would find a flimsy excuse to impose president's rule and dismiss the government.
Can you give us some example of how blatant this was?
Well, the most glaring examples are the mass dismissals. In 1977, the Janata Party won the national election.
Oh, okay.
They looked at 9 states where the Congress Party was still in power and essentially said, well, you guys lost the national election, so you obviously don't represent the people anymore. And they just dismissed all 9 state governments in one go.
Just wiped them out, even though they had valid mandates in their own states.
Yes. And the irony is, when Congress returned to power in 1980, they did the exact same thing. They dismissed 9 Janata-ruled state governments. It was tit-for-tat politics, using the Constitution as a weapon to destroy the opposition.
That sounds incredibly unstable. Was there no check on this? Did the courts just sit back and watch?
For a long time, yeah, the courts were hesitant. They viewed it as a political thicket they shouldn't enter. They felt the president's satisfaction was subjective and not something for judges to evaluate. But that all changed in 1994.
The Bombay case.
S.R. Bommai v. Union of India. This is the turning point. It is to Article 356 what the Minerva Mills case is to national emergency. It's that significant.
So what did the Supreme Court decide in Bommai? What did it change?
Okay, so they laid down these strict guidelines. First, and this is huge, they said the presidential proclamation is subject to judicial review. The center cannot just say we are satisfied and expect the court to back off. They have to show the material on which that satisfaction is based.
So the burden of proof is now on the center.
Yes. And if the court finds the dismissal was malified or unconstitutional, they have the power to turn back the clock. They can restore the dismissed government and revive the dissolved assembly.
That is a huge deterrent. It basically tells the center, if you play games, we will humiliate you by putting the people you fired back in power.
Exactly. The other massive takeaway from Bommai was the floor test.
The floor test.
Before this, governors would often play favorites. They'd sit in the Raj Bhavan and say, I don't think this chief minister has the numbers anymore, based on their own subjective opinion or maybe a few letters of support.
And the Bommai judgment stopped that.
The court ruled that the only place to determine if a government has a majority is on the floor of the legislative assembly. You have to hold a vote. You cannot dismiss a government based on the governor's guess.
That brings transparency into it. There was also a very interesting point in Bommai regarding secularism, wasn't there?
Yes. This came from the dismissal of 3 BJP-ruled states, Madhya Pradesh, Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan in 1992, right after the Babri Masjid demolition and the communal violence that followed.
Okay.
The center argued that these governments were supporting banned religious organizations and failing to uphold secularism.
And the court agreed with that.
They did. The Supreme Court ruled that secularism is a basic feature of the Constitution. Therefore, if a state government pursues anti-secular politics, it is acting against the Constitution. And that creates valid grounds for using Article 356.
That sets a fascinating precedent that ideology, if it violates the basic structure, can be grounds for dismissal.
So Bommai really categorized the usage. Proper use. A hung assembly where no one has a majority, or a ministry resigns and no one else can form a government.
And improper use.
Settling political scores, sorting out internal party problems, or these mass dismissals after a national election.
But has it worked? Has it made a difference?
Oh, significantly. The frequency of president's rule has dropped dramatically since the mid-90s. The deadly weapon has a safety lock on it now, thanks to the Supreme Court.
Before we move on, let's quickly touch on the approval process for president's rule. Is it as tough as for a national emergency?
No, it's easier. Parliament has 2 months to approve it, and they only need a simple majority.
So it's easier to pass.
Yes. But there's a limit on how long you can keep a state under president's rule. It lasts for 6 months, and it can be extended up to a maximum of 3 years. But, and here comes the 44th Amendment again, to extend it beyond 1 year, 2 very tough conditions must be met.
You can't just keep extending it because it's convenient.
No. First, a national emergency must be in operation in the whole of India or in that state. And second, the Election Commission must certify that general elections to the Assembly just cannot be held due to difficulties.
So unless the Election Commission says it is physically impossible to vote, you have to hold elections and restore democracy within a year.
Exactly. It prevents indefinite central rule.
Okay. That brings us to the third and final type of emergency, the one that frankly is just gathering dust on the shelf. Article 360, the financial emergency.
The ghost in the machine.
Has it? Has it ever been used?
Never. Not once in the history of independent India.
Not even in 1991. I mean, that was a massive crisis. India had a balance of payments crisis. We were literally airlifting gold to London to secure loans.
It was incredibly close. But the government managed to navigate the reforms without formally declaring a financial emergency.
So what is it for? I mean, what kind of situation would trigger it?
Article 360 empowers the president to proclaim an emergency if he is satisfied that the financial stability or credit of India is threatened. The source notes that Dr. Ambedkar drew inspiration for this from the National Recovery Act in the United States, which was passed in 1933 during the Great Depression.
So it's a tool for total economic collapse. If they ever pressed this button, what would happen?
The center would acquire full control over the financial propriety of the entire country. The president can issue directions to the states to observe certain canons of financial propriety.
That sounds polite, but I'm assuming the teeth are sharper.
Oh, they are. The president can issue directions to reduce salaries and allowances of all or any class of persons serving the state.
So pay cuts for government employees.
And not just state employees. The president can order the reduction of salaries of union employees and, this is the real shocker, judges of the Supreme Court and high courts.
Wait, usually judicial salaries are constitutionally protected to ensure their independence, right? You can't just cut a judge's pay because you don't like their rulings.
Exactly. But in a financial emergency, that protection is overridden. That shows you the sheer severity of the crisis it was designed for. Everyone, including the judiciary, takes a hit to save the nation's credit.
And what about the state's money?
They lose their financial autonomy. The president can require that all money bills passed by the state legislature be reserved for his consideration.
So the state can't spend a single rupee without the president, which means the center, signing off on it.
Basically, yeah. It turns the states into complete financial dependence.
It is remarkable that we have this break in case of fire acts that we've never, ever had to use.
Let's hope it stays that way. And unlike the other two emergencies, once this one is approved by Parliament's simple majority, within 2 months, it continues indefinitely until it is revoked. It doesn't need repeated approval. It's a toggle switch. On until it's turned off.
We have covered a massive amount of ground here. We've seen the shapeshifter in action. We've seen the national emergency that turns the country unitary, the president's rule that dismisses state governments, the financial emergency that seizes the purse strings.
It's a formidable arsenal of power.
And it makes me think about the debates back in the Constituent Assembly. Because surely the men and women writing this document knew they were creating a potential monster.
Oh, they knew. The debates were incredibly fiery. The source material quotes K.T. Shah, a member of the Assembly, who was just furious about these provisions. He called this whole chapter a chapter of reaction and retrogression.
He felt it was a step backward.
He feared that while the name of liberty would remain in the Constitution, the substance would be gone. And H.V. Kamath was even more dramatic. He warned that we were laying the foundation of a totalitarian state or a police state.
He famously said, "It will be a day of shame and sorrow when the president makes use of these powers."
Which, looking at the events of 1975 was almost prophetic.
T.T. Krishnamacharya even coined the term constitutional dictatorship.
He did.
But there was a counter-argument, right? There were people who defended these powers.
Yes, absolutely. The defenders, like Saralati Krishnaswamy IR, argued that these provisions were the very life breath of the Constitution.
Life breath. That is a completely different perspective. Wow.
And Mahabir Tyagi used a great analogy. He called them a safety valve.
A safety valve.
The idea is that in a steam engine, if the pressure gets too high and you don't have a valve to release it, the whole boiler explodes.
The argument being, if you don't have a legal way to suspend the rules temporarily during a crisis, the crisis might just destroy the entire Constitution. You suspend the Constitution to save the Constitution.
Exactly. To safeguard the sovereignty, the unity, and the integrity of the country. It's the ultimate trade-off.
And I think the journey we've described today, from that vague internal disturbance clause of 1950 to the abuse of 1975 and then the corrections of the 44th Amendment and the Bombay judgment, it really shows a maturing democracy.
We moved from a system based on trust, just hoping leaders would be good, to a system based on rules and checks and balances.
The 44th Amendment really is the unsung hero of Indian democracy, isn't it?
It took the loaded gun, put the safety on, and locked it in a glass case. You can still use it, but you better have a really, really good reason, and everyone is going to be watching.
So here is a final provocative thought for you, our listener. We've spent this whole time discussing how the Constitution allows the center to become this unitary giant to save the nation from external threats or rebellion. The assumption is always that the center is the savior.
Right. The strong hand that protects the weak.
But history, specifically the 1975 emergency, showed us that sometimes the biggest threat to the Constitution doesn't come from outside or from a rebellion. It comes from within that very power structure.
That is the central paradox.
The Constitution empowers the state to protect us. But who protects us from the state? The 44th Amendment and the courts are our answer, but is it enough? That's the question that always hangs over a democracy.
Indeed. Constant vigilance is the price of liberty.
Thank you so much for diving deep with us today. This was dense material acts, articles, amendments, case law, but I think we found the human story inside the legalese.
It was a pleasure to unpack it all.
If you enjoyed this breakdown of the legal framework, historical cases, and acts regarding emergency provisions, please like and subscribe to the channel Deep Dive Daily. It really does help us keep these deep dives coming.
We'll see you next time.
Stay curious.